Well, to those watching us on YouTube and elsewhere, thank you for joining us. So welcome to what is now the Q&A session following the presentations that we have just had. My name is Martin, and I will not really generally intervene as much as possible because the time is short, and we want the opportunity for all relevant questions to be asked and to be discussed. So what I would like to invite everyone to do, if you have any questions to anyone, is to put them in the chat box, making sure that you choose to all panelists and attendees. So if you're looking in your chat box right now, it should default to all panelists. But if you write to just the panelists, then others will not see your questions. So for the benefit of all, if you could switch to that. And I will invite you to put your questions there rather than in the Q&A box, because not everyone can see the Q&A box. And lastly, if you would like to phrase your question by whom you would like to address the question to, such that you can address it to one of the panelists or a subset of the panelists, or to all of the panel. So I can't actually see what participants we have right now, so I have no idea how many people there are, but do please start asking questions. I don't feel that I need to introduce the participants because if you are at the Q&A session, you likely have watched the presentations on YouTube. But if you have joined us halfway through, you can go to the Seeing Sound website, and if you follow presentations, you will get a short biography and a short description of all of the presentations that were presented. Without further ado, do we have any questions from any of the attendees? Attendees. I'm keen-eyed, and I am not seeing any questions just yet. So maybe we can start by having a panelist ask a question to the whole panel. So would anyone like to ask a question that they think might be interesting?
How about you, Martin? Do you have any ideas?
I do have some ideas, but I feel that my questions are going to be possibly very naive and less interesting than yours. But if no one will step up, I will quite.
We've got a question from Joe, it looks like.
We do. Okay.
Yeah, so he says, Dan, you started out with Connect and then went on to non-real-time input. Yes, which is right. I basically started with, I basically wanted to figure out how to do 3D scans of things. And I started out basically making these kind of Connect depth map type of movies. And I guess I found I was much more interested in actually using photogrammetry techniques to kind of model static objects and then try and manipulate them into, so taking still objects and then kind of manipulating them into things that I could make into kind of more moving material and media. I think that really fascinated me, especially because I'm not very good at 3D modeling. So the ability to kind of like start bringing in these objects and making them into something physical that I could then engage with my computer and then break apart into kind of an interface for sound was really exciting. So while the Connect's really amazing in terms of just taking real-time input and having something occur on the screen and being able to control things right away, I found that I was able to, I guess, nerd out a bit more on getting into the photogrammetry and using different algorithms to stitch together these objects. And then kind of, I felt I had a greater understanding of what was going on. So could kind of get more involved in ripping apart that stuff and doing a bit more creative and experimental things in my practice with that.
And maybe we can turn the question to the panel. I will rephrase that a little bit in a way, but there seems to be a shift a little bit about notions of real time, and our real time is at the root of audiovisual music practice. I mean, I'm wondering myself whether the shift that I did see is because COVID forces us to work with screens and with performativity more or less stunted. But what are the opinions of the panel on this? Is there a change in this way?
I've got an opinion, which is I think it might be COVID related, but it might not. But you've always got that desire as a musician to interact with the device in an embodied way, in an unconscious sort of way, as a kind of mechanism to compose and improvise in the same way you would with any other type of machine or instrument, right? So sort of try to go from the imagination directly to the sort of experience of creation. And it's great that technology allows you to do that. And personally, from my own experience, that's where I find that is interesting, because things I have not thought about then erupt and come out of my imagination. And so, I think that's sort of a common practice, but likewise, there are lots of people who you do end up with problems there, right? Where you do everything and you record loads of stuff, and then you have to try and find a way to make it into something. And other people prefer to just be very determined about what they do. So I think it's just a question of the perspective you take on the practice.
Great, thank you, Mick. We have a question from Clovis McAvoy, who's asking particularly to Elena Ira. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Who asks, how do you view the democratizing potential in your web-based work? Was accessibility in sound creation a driving force for the development of the project?
Yeah, so if I understand it, the accessibility in sound creation, does it refer to my own practice or to the users of the website? Perhaps we can, I can ask Clovis to
okay, perhaps we can ask Clovis to just refine that question. And just in the meantime, another question that was asked from Fred Colopy is, at the first panel, there were some comments about the blurring of works in instruments. How are your work practices changing as this blurring takes place? No answers from anyone?
I mean, yeah, I think it's again, you're in the same situation, the same area you were talking about before, instruments and work. Sometimes your interpretation is around the device you're using and the machine you're using, and that the idea of a work and the actual the machine you are building being the root of the work is quite common these days, because there's so much capacity to do that.
Okay, we have a clarification from Clovis to Elena Ira.
Yeah.
Elena Ira, apologies. He was saying that he was thinking more of the democratization in the user base, allowing non-musicians or composers to access audiovisual tools.
Yeah, I mean, it was from a dual perspective, not only addressed to musicians or composers, but also to artists and people who have a particular relationship with art. So yes, it was these globes that could be anyone practically who has access to the internet and would like to become more creative and to interact with the web interface that gives in this potential of exploration and this dialogue between actions in the visual domain and actions in the sound domain, and how this can be perhaps further experimented with by anyone. So yeah, it was
Great, thank
a
you.
tour force.
We have several questions to Rob Mackay, who which are to do with the streaming. So one is asking, could you explain the setup that you used to stream the site in Mexico? And you mentioned Raspberry Pi. Somebody's asking how you kept the stream boxes dry. They're saying, did you make them or SoundCamp? And I think it was another one. Yeah, somebody else is also asking about the setup. So Rob, care to expand, please?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I think I have one I can show you. So if you wait 1 second.
Fantastic. Oh, excellent.
Usually easier to show rather than say. So yeah, I've been working with SoundCamp, a UK kind of technology and art organization, and the setup in Mexico. So for those who haven't been able to see the presentation, basically I've been starting to install stream boxes along the migration routes of monarch butterflies. At the moment, we've got one in Canada and one in Mexico, and they're there most of the time, streaming 24/7. So this is the kind of the setup. It's in a dry box enclosure. So there's a company that make these. You can probably see DRI box, and there's a lid that goes on top as well with a rubber seal. And any cables going in and out, there are some kind of rubber seals there as well. It's a bit of a mess at the moment, but there's a Raspberry Pi. My video is freezing. There we go. Raspberry Pi computer with an SD card with an auto boot script that is made by SoundCamp. And then you've got two omnidirectional microphones either side. So with the box in the middle, it kind of makes a kind of pseudo binaural setup. So it sounds great with headphones. And then we've got a router that works with a SIM card. So particularly in Mexico, when we're in this reserve, very much, sort of right up in the mountains, we're just using a cell signal there, and then we're connecting to a couple of solar panels and solar batteries. And the protection for the solar batteries was just, we went to like what's it called? Something depot. It's like B&Q. It's just got a big plastic box basically and cut some holes in it for the for the cables. So the box and the Raspberry Pi setup and everything. Home Depot. Thank you very much, Owen. So really work with them, and then they collaborate with Locus Sonus, who that's been running. I think it's Peter Sinclair who set that up at the École Supérieure d'Aix-en-Provence and in collaboration with the University of Marseille. And very quickly, I know someone was asking about the link as well. So again, I don't know if I can share the screen or if that's possible to share the screen, or at the very least I can copy and paste the link to the Locus Sonus sound map and put that into the chat. So then on a browser, if you just put that in, then basically it's an open source platform. It's been running since 2006, and all of the pins you can see on it, it kind of links to Google Maps. So it's constantly updated in terms of the maps that you see, as far as I understand. And then pins sort of appear and disappear on it when people are streaming. So I'm just looking at it now, and there's maybe about 20 streams on there. And those all represent live audio streams, and it's quite high quality audio. And I've got some recordings I could sort of share with you as well. One of my favorite streams on there is usually just between January and March in Hawaii, where they've got some hydrophones there, and they capture the sounds of humpback whales as they're migrating south and sort of in their breeding season there. But it's like I say, anyone can set up. They've got a Locus Cast app as well, so it'll turn a smartphone into a streaming device, or there's a PD patch, so you can turn your laptop into a streaming device as well. So the final bit, I've been working on using the live streams in telematic performances as well. So we've been using the sound map to stream musicians and poets alongside the live audio, it's sort of environmental streams from the monarch butterfly reserves. So I've been working with a poet in Mexico, a musician in California, and a video artist in Canada. And we do sort of a live audiovisual telematic performance as well. That's the sort of the newest part of that. But we're kind of using very, I suppose, simple compositional strategies to get over the delay, because sometimes it's up to 30 seconds delay. So we have like a text score, and there's some very textural bits, and there's sort of kind of, I suppose, chance-based interactions. But then when we do want to play in a fixed tempo, David Blink, who's playing the handpan and the trumpet in California, would just turn his monitors off and play a constant ostinato, and then I can play my flute over the top of that. So kind of, simple solutions to some of the technical challenges of working in that way.
Great. Thank you, Rob. We have another question for Eleni Ira. My apologies. I will get your name right at some point. Somebody's asking how the relationship between sound and printmaking come about for you.
Yeah, thanks for this question, Liz. I guess it was kind of a natural kind of meeting point, because I was working in printmaking and sound at the same time. But I was particularly interested, from the one hand, on the gestures and the movements that I could capture once this drawing on the metal plate is printed. And at the same time, I was interested in the different textures that I could generate with this technique of monoprinting. So I guess then I was interested in expanding this single print that was kind of frozen in time. So expanding it over time with sound. So that was my idea behind that.
Great. We have a question for both Liz and Rob. Is there a comparative aspect to the acoustic ecological data you collect? That is to say, in addition to the acoustic data you're currently collecting through your pieces, are you comparing or incorporating the current data with any historical acoustic monitoring data related to your projects?
Do you want to? Shall I go first?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I already feel like I've talked a lot. So,
so I wonder if the question perhaps refers to like the work of, soundscape ecologists like Bernie Krause, who did a whole bunch of field recording about like 30 years ago, and is now able to sort of compare 10 years later, or even a year later, the how the acoustics of an environment's changed in that time, maybe due to, say, clear-cut logging or selective logging and stuff like that. So I hope I'm going down the right track and thinking that that might be what the question's about. For the project that I presented to, for Seeing Sound, in fact, it's kind of the beginning for me for field recording and working in acoustic ecology. But the idea of going back to a site to revisit those soundscapes in a year, or as soon as I can, basically, as soon as we're released from lockdown, I would really like to revisit them and start to create more of an archive of how the acoustic spaces change over time. But I'm definitely at the beginning of that process at the moment.
Rob, your side of it?
yeah, sure. No, thanks for that, Liz. Yeah, certainly sort of interpreted the question in a very sort of similar way. I think my hope is that over time we will be able to collect some data from this point onwards for comparison. In terms of the actual sites that we're working with, there's a kind of a mix of the kind of available data that, historical data that exists. So, for example, in the Cerro Pelon Reserve, I'm not aware of any sort of sound archiving work that's been done in that reserve that we're live streaming from in Mexico, but we're also working with Point Pelee National Park in Canada, which is the kind of this knife-edge peninsula that cuts into Lake Erie, which is like the point where the monarchs kind of cluster to start migrating south, this long 3,000-mile migration. And I do know that there's an acoustic ecologist who has worked with the parks for a number of years, Leonardo Cabrera, who has a lot of recordings there, and there are a lot of people that have been recording this. You know, it's a big sort of bird migration point as well. So I think there's good potential to connect with them and their archives. And then interestingly, I just had a conversation yesterday where we're trying to set up a stream in Virginia on the Eastern Shores, and we're working with a sound artist there, Vaughan Garland, and Kipta Peak State Park. They have a meadow which is sort of perfect for the butterflies. There's lots of flowers where they can nectar, and lots of migrating bird species as well. But there's a different field which is looking like they are sort of they're growing new shrubs. They're kind of reforesting it, and we were thinking it's almost the Bernie Krause in reverse potentially. So, you know, there's a sort of really there's this amazing example in the Sierra Nevada mountains where he went where there was selective logging and took a photograph, and it looked pretty much the same 6 months after logging, but the field recordings that he took 6 months before and then 6 months after told a very different story. And a lot of his work is showing this kind of great silence falling over the earth. But we're also connecting with people who are trying to make a difference. So with the monarch butterflies, their numbers have declined by nearly 90% over the last 2 decades. And a lot of that is to do with industrial use of herbicides and pesticides, killing a lot of the milkweed, which is the only plants that their larvae can eat. But there's been a huge sort of grassroots movement with Monarch Watch and other organizations to encourage people to plant milkweed in their back gardens, and that is actually making a difference, and they're seeing these numbers come back. And so what the acoustic ecology angle, I guess, of this project is, if the monarch butterflies are like an indicator species, their numbers have been so sort of decimated by these changes in the environment, surely that's affecting other organisms as well. Can sound tell us something about those changes? So we're actually looking at places where there's sort of reforesting happening, and are we able to monitor perhaps some positive changes happening over time? That's the hope anyway. So it's very much in its infancy. It's really been sort of like a pilot project with trying to get the live streaming technologies working, but we're hoping to sort of connect with citizen scientists who can listen in to the streams and start to build up a database, or maybe sort of long-term recording. Then you've got the whole big data issue. And one last thing I'll say is I know that Dan Stowell at is it Queen Mary's University has developed this amazing app, Warbler, for bird identification using machine listening, and that's been in the UK for a number of years, but they've got a version that they're just rolling out in the States now, which has sort of database of species there, and so that's one tool that people could be using with the streams for bird identification as well.
Is that BirdNet you're referring to, Rob?
Sorry?
Was that BirdNet that you were referring to in the States?
Well, I think it's the same app. I think Warbler with a BLR, rather no E for the E at the end.
I was just curious because I've been using BirdNet because during lockdown I had so many birds coming in my front garden, and I was just very curious, and I started using that, and I didn't know the Warbler one.
Oh, I didn't know the BirdNet one, so thanks. I'll make a note of that.
I think it's from one of the East Coast universities. We have a question for Mick and Chris, who somebody's asking if the Immerse AV toolkit that will be presented by Brian Dunphy has grown out of your own project.
I mean, in some ways, I guess. But I wouldn't want to take away from Brian's contribution by saying that it was, I mean, he's in the lab at Goldsmiths that we had, that Chris was also at before you went to Sussex, Chris, right? So Brian sort of is a fantastic and really interesting artist in his own right, and has developed some really interesting tools. But yeah, basically the problem with the stuff that we've been trying to do is there aren't any tools that make it really easy for people to hack and create works. It's quite hard to make new works with artificial intelligence and machine learning. What Brian's tried to do is something we've tried to encourage all our researchers to do, is to build a new instrument so that, and then understand it's the affordances to work out what kinds of new work we might make with it. And so Immerse AV is what his response to that challenge, an immersive toolkit to allow people to create real-time immersive audiovisual interaction systems with machine learning all baked in. But yeah, so yeah, in some ways, but Brian's his own man and doing his own thing, you know.
Okay, great, thank you. Somebody's also asking to make, and Chris saying, I am fascinated with how tightly integrated and alive, as it were, the audiovisual result is in the two works that have been shown as examples of the research work. The artistic closeness of audiovisual is really fascinating. Are you finding that there are some visual or audio settings that are getting better or worse results? Or should I ask, is it easy to quantify the visual and audio result as to what strategies one can take to the audio and visual information?
Chris.
I think with neural networks at the moment, it's things are really messy, and doing audiovisual work with them is quite on the edge of things at the moment. So it's difficult to really give an answer of what's meant to do what at the moment. Everyone's doing a lot of different experimentation. I think one thing you can say is that sometimes there's this concept of overtraining in machine learning, where you can teach a network too well, and then it'll just repeat what it's taught, but it won't be able to make interesting extrapolations from that data. So you can, in the process of training a model, which is part of the creative process, really part of the composition in what data you show to that network, you can deliberately undertrain a network, and then it'll basically kind of do the digital equivalent of be really confused. Yeah. And then you get this serendipity, which is you get really nice, interesting surprises because it doesn't really know what it's doing properly, but it's still kind of got a rough idea in the right direction.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. There was an earlier question which I felt was kind of partly answered, but somebody was asking to Liz specifically, what were your plans going forward? So you did say that you wanted to collect more information, but I think the question was, what are the next steps that would be informed by the discovery of what you're doing, I suppose?
Well, the presentation today was a small part of a much wider project about basically what can be learnt from listening to trees. It's part of my PhD project, where I sort of identified within soundscape ecology how people were studying animal sounds, geological sounds and human sounds, but trees were sort of missed out from this lexicon of terms of what you could actually listen to and study. So this, I'm doing a lot more kind of visual investigation of creaking trees, transpiration, the sounds of susurrations of leaves where they kind of rustle and they have their individual sound texture. So yeah, a sort of a much wide-ranging study, but pretty niche, the sounds of trees.
Okay, great. There aren't any questions in the pipeline, but I am keeping a keen eye. One question that I would like to ask to the whole panel, which I will admit is biased, I'm interested. But one thing that was quite clear to me in watching today's presentation is that there's the sort of realization that that we are in a different era than we were some time ago, when there was a sort of drive that came from universities and research centers and arts organizations for interdisciplinarity and collaboration across disciplines. And what is very apparent to me is that all of the practitioners here are people who operate in more than one discipline, but you hardly have to talk about that aspect. It seems to have been taken as granted that, well, I do discipline X, but I also do this and that and the rest. And I suppose my question becomes, from your point of view, is that something that needs revisiting or discussing, in a sense that, well, there's a paradigmatic shift that must have happened such that it's no longer part of the conversation? Yes, Yati.
I mean, I can throw something in there.
Yes,
kind of
please.
from my experience. Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Because my background is definitely multidisciplinary, and what I've been doing for the last 10 years is primarily media music, not necessarily sound arts. Is that it seems like for some reason media music, the concept of media music, the multidisciplinary aspect of media music has sort of come of age in the way that they are, maybe as some of you mentioned, they're not really considered to be different art forms that are congealed together in a kind of production setting. You know, I think someone was mentioning that. But then at the same time, the access that we have to have, I mean, technologically, I think that made a huge difference. But even the media music fields, I mean, the more conventional kind of media music, film music. I mean, a film composer, for example, people don't even want to call themselves film composers anymore. They're essentially media artists, sound artists, and they're certainly kind of reaching over into a different field of multidisciplinary practice, and then using that in a more conventional commercial way. So I'm seeing those things naturally merge, and you know, I think that it has something to do with the technology and the access that we have. You know, to all of the information and lovely things that we're all talking about here. That's just my 2 cents, essentially.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think
Carol.
I would actually disagree because I in my own experience, I work with biology and chemistry, and that's mostly seen as a very strange combination. I often get kind of people kind of having difficulty to kind of see that kind of relationship, how that could work. And yeah, I think it's actually a really interesting field because I think actually the COVID pandemic shows us that biotech is incredibly important. So I think that's an area that potentially can be explored much more, because in a way, if you excuse me, it feels like that most of you are kind of very much focused on digital technology, which is of course there's totally nothing against that, but. Yeah, I think that could be expanded, and there could be other disciplines that are coming in.
Anyone else want to chip in on this one? Okay, we've got another question to Karel. Somebody is saying that they were fascinated with your work, and could you talk a little bit more about the relationship between sound and image in your work? They're also asking if there was cymbalom in your video, because this is saying that's what it sounded like.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It was a bit an accident, because I was working on that film already, and then I went to a concert, and it was a musician who actually made his own instrument, and it certainly has a lot of similarities with the cymbalom, but yeah, he used kind of very simple materials. That is kind of one of the things that attracted me, because it was so basic. I heard him playing, and just because of the minimalism, but also kind of the very kind of interesting variations of the music. So there was this kind of minimal quality that was very kind of, it felt like endless repetitions, but there were also kind of endless variations going on at the same time, and that felt like a perfect match. So I think that's actually all there is to tell, because I just the moment that I heard that, I thought like, that's the match, and I asked him to make the soundtrack, and he was very interested. So that's how the two things came together. So in that sense, I'm also I mostly kind of focus on collaboration. I do some sound recordings, and I do some editing, sound editing, but I'm not a musician. So I always need somebody else coming in.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karel. Right, there are no other questions in the pipeline, but I'm still keeping a keen eye, and we still have about 7 minutes. I am conscious that we must stop on time, so I will keep looking at the clock. So I'm not bored. I'm just warning you. That's what happens. I do have one question that I would like to ask all of you, because I think it might be a good way to kind of like get to a sort of natural conclusion of this discussion. So I'm going to put a downer on the proceedings and say, in this situation of COVID that has destabilized everyone and created arbitrary constraints, of course, everyone has had to be creative and find ways to be able to keep doing their things. And I think many of the panelists showed that they responded brilliantly to that. But one question that I'm particularly interested to ask all of you is to see, knowing that this is a temporary situation, that we're going to come out of it, what are the kinds of things that you're thinking, this is something that really, that I'm really looking forward to, and that I'm really intent on bringing into my practice, because that has been not possible, or that has been stunted? I'm sure all of you have some ideas. Dan?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the ability to physically collaborate with people. Like before COVID, I'd initiated a couple of collaborations with, I was just finishing off an MFA at York University in Fine Arts, actually, not digital arts. And I'd initiated a couple of collaborations with the physics department there, and we were going to be doing some kind of work scanning calcite crystals at like a molecular level, and then trying to sonify those. And that really was halted just by the inability to be together in the same room and things like that. And, you know, we lost access to quite a lot of facilities for a while, and slowly got access to those back. So I'm really looking forward to just going back to having in-person conversations and being able to experiment in person with people. Because obviously there's a plethora of things you can do digitally, but it's also, you know, there's a whole world of opportunities that opens up, but also there's a whole load of limitations and things it takes away. So I'm excited to kind of explore the physical things again.
All right, anybody else?
I really want to spend time with people in a room talking nonsense, just like being able to waste time rather than always have to look at the clock and make sure that I'm not late for my next Zoom. I really miss that creative energy you get when you're with people, and ideas just flow. I just think that's not, I mean, that can happen over Zoom and it kind of works, but I don't know. I mean, me and Chris, we went for dinner in Durham with Nick and everybody at Christmas, and we had a really good time. And that's where the idea for network bending came from, really. And it just comes from that to and fro. And yeah, I miss that.
Anybody else?
I'll just reiterate what I said before, which is fuck COVID.
Yeah, I'm with you, Barry. I don't think that the sentiment can be better expressed. I think you've got it right on the money. So what are the things that you're looking most forward to being able to do post-COVID?
One of the things that COVID's forced me to do was start exhibiting outside, because that was the only place that people could come to see work, and it's now definitely going to become more part of the practice. So I'm actually looking forward to exhibiting outside again and more.
Good. I think there should be more exploitation of the outside. I think one thing I discovered is that I've always considered myself to not be an outdoors person. And now I feel cooped up indoors, and I relish any opportunity to just go outside. So now regularly I'll be found wandering the streets of my neighborhood with microphones, just looking like a crazy person. And often I'll go with my wife, and people will ask my wife, "What is he recording?" And then she'll say, "Why are you asking me? He's the one with the microphone." But I digress. Okay, we still got a few minutes. I would like to ask of the Eleni, go for it. Please tell us.
I would just add the opportunity to share work and to actually set up interactive and participatory installations or performances. That's what I mostly kind of have missed in this couple of months. Yeah.
Well, hopefully it will be coming sooner rather than later. Okay, we still got about 2 minutes. Any last words from any of our panelists that come to mind after all of the wonderful things that have been discussed today? Rob?
Just thanks very much for putting on such a wonderful conference yet again. It's really fascinating seeing all of the different approaches that people are taking, and it's always really inspiring. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to being able to do non-Zoom conferences as well, getting into a room and talking like Mick says, that kind of to and fro. And I've actually sort of started a new job quite recently at Newcastle University, and it's all been in the 2D realm, and so you miss all of those, like bumping into people in corridors or chatting to them at the beginning or end of meetings, all those things you don't plan. So I'm really looking forward to those kinds of interactions again as well. Yeah.
Well, I suppose we'll all have a renewed appreciation to all of these things that we miss right now, and hopefully that gives us something to look forward to the next Seeing Sound. So, well, thank you to everyone. This was enlightening and entertaining and eye-opening in many ways, and I do hope that anyone who's been watching found something of interest in that. Thank you very much to the panelists for your patience and your candor and your observations of various sorts. So we need to stop now because we need to be absolutely on time for the next thing that starts in 15 seconds. So thank you very much to everyone, and looking forward to seeing you all again, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.